Good afternoon. Today we're going to have a webinar on E-rate with Lori Leugers, who is from Telecom Solutions, and she's been an E-rate consultant for a number of years and has agreed to share this information with us for this webinar that we will also be recording and posting for others that didn't make it online today. But you have the advantage of being able to ask your questions today because you're on the webinar. We will ask you to hold them until the end and use the chat feature to enter your questions. So without further ado, I will introduce you to Lori Leugers from Telecom Solutions. Lori?
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Cheryl, for making this happen for your library constituents. I think libraries are often felt like the orphans of the E-rate program because most of the education and resources are geared for your schools and school district applicants. So although a lot of the information is the same, my presentation is geared primarily for libraries so that you guys can understand what is specific to your organizations. So with that said, I did have a housekeeping slide, but I think Cheryl covered everything in there. I'm going to go through the presentation first, and during the presentation, please feel free to submit questions through that chat icon at the top of your screen, and then we'll go through them at the end. I thought that Cheryl had to unmute you, but apparently you can unmute yourself. So if you find yourself in a situation where I'm answering your question at the end and I'm not clarifying it for you, then you can go ahead and unmute yourself. So that will make it a little bit easier for us to identify who needs to have questions answered. So with that said, I hope that this is a useful presentation. I'm assuming because you know that this is an E-rate 101, that most of you who are here today are probably at least new to the program, even though your organization itself may have been participating in the program for some time, and you want to get some of the basic understanding of how this works. That's pretty much how I'm gearing it. However, because of some pretty important deadlines that are coming up, I want to address them if time allows. So I'm going to kind of drill down a little bit more if we can. So with that said, my agenda here today is I'm going to give you some background, discuss eligible library entities, what's eligible for funding in the program, the eligible goods and services, discounts and Category 2 budgets, which we will go into more detail, E-rate portal basics, the actual filing process, SIPA compliance. SIPA is the Children's Internet Protection Act, and I'm going to provide you with a whole slew of some resources with links that you can follow up on if you need to learn some more information, and then we'll have a Q&A session. So background, the Universal Service Fund, or the E-rate program, was created as part of the Universal Service Mechanism, which was came out of an act that Congress passed, the Telecommunications Act in 1996. And they did that to stimulate competition in the telecommunications, primarily for phone service at that time, but they wanted to be able to make affordable telecommunications available to the hinterlands, and so they incentivized, they built this mechanism to incentivize carriers to provide infrastructure to rural areas that didn't have phone service, in fact. Since then, it's grown to encompass internet and other telecommunications and broadband network equipment and infrastructure. So anyway, in the act, Congress appointed the FCC as the regulatory agency that would oversee the program and make the rules for the program. And in turn, FCC has designated Universal Service Administration Company, USAC, as the company that will administer the program. So each year, USAC comes up with suggested rules for administering the program, and it's approved by the FCC. The program has been around for quite some time, and it cannot be eliminated without a vote of Congress. So if you feel like it's under jeopardy, contact your congressman. But for now, everything is pretty solid. So anyway, again, the goal of the Universal Service Program is to promote competition at an affordable cost. And for you as recipients of services in that program, that means that your service providers who are bidding on services and providing you with the funded products and services, they have to provide them to you at the lowest corresponding price. And what that means is that they have to give you the lowest available price that they would provide to any other organization that is similarly situated as yourself. Discounts in the program range from 20 to 90% on telecommunications, internet, and network equipment and cabling infrastructure and maintenance on that equipment. Initially, when the E-rate program was established, the budget was $2.25 billion a year, but in this last iteration, the FCC approved an increase to fund up to $3.9 billion, and primarily that was to encourage more of an infrastructure, the equipment and what's needed to actually make broadband work within your libraries and schools. And it's funded through assessments on interstate telecommunications services. So, for example, if you look at your phone bills or your cell phone bills, you'll see a Universal Service Fund surcharge, and that's what it's paying for, in addition to 3 other sectors of this fund. So funding commitments in the E-rate program, they're made on a yearly basis, and it runs from July 1st through June 30th. And I wanted to share a little bit of statistics that Sonia Schreier-Norris from Library of Michigan gathered. She had conducted a survey and did some research, and in that she found that libraries make up about 5% of E-rate dollars nationwide. And in 2016, $4.3 million in E-rate funding went to Michigan libraries, which is the same amount as the total federal funding through the Library Services and Technology Act. And she also discovered that approximately half of Michigan libraries participate in the E-rate program. And for those of you who might be interested in the research that she did, I think it's a 6 or 8 page study that she published, the report, and it's interesting to see, what barriers libraries have found to participating, and how many of them use consultants and whatnot. But this link here will take you to that. So eligible library entities, you must be designated as a library by your statewide library administrator or the state library. In this case, it's the Library of Michigan. You must also be eligible to receive funds under the Library Services and Technology Act. And eligible entities in the state of Michigan include public, private, academic, research, and tribal libraries. Those are all eligible types. Now this next slide is kind of funky. I tried to get fancy with some animation, so please forgive me if it doesn't appear properly to you. But basically, when you file under a number of different applicant types. You can either be an independent library. In that case, you aren't affiliated with a system, or you can be a library system that's comprised of branches. My PowerPoint's threatening to crash on me. So anyway, so you can file as a library system, and each of these library and organization types may also be members of a consortium, in which case you could file both your own applications and participate as a member of a consortium. If you do participate in both, then you don't necessarily have to participate with all of your entities. The consortium, if you're only getting services at your main branch, for example, you can have just your main branch be a recipient of service under a consortium application. So in addition to the actual library buildings, libraries may have kiosks or bookmobiles, and USAC or the FCC has left it up to the individual states to designate whether those qualify as official libraries, and in the state of Michigan they don't. So kiosks and bookmobiles should be registered as a annex, and they're annexed to the specific building that they're associated with. So if you're an independent library, you might have an annex of a bookmobile. If you're a library system, each building within that system might also have a bookmobile or a kiosk associated with it. Sorry for the delay, we're waiting for. So basically just reiterating what I just said. So if you participate in a consortium, your relationship with your annexes will follow right along with you. So some libraries and library systems may have non-public buildings, such as an admin building or a bus garage for your bookmobiles. In the E-rate system, they are not considered libraries, nor are they libraries in the state of Michigan, but it's important to have them recognized if they are recipients of services that you're getting funded for. So you want to enter them as non-instructional facilities. That's the entity type, and we'll cover that a little bit later. But for purposes of E-rate filing, you do want to have them. You'll need to know their address, phone number, and any other physical properties that you need to create an entity within the portal. And we'll go over that. So, eligible goods and services. What's eligible? There's two categories. There's Category 1 and Category 2. In Category 1, you think of the services that you use to communicate to other facilities. So, for example, your phone service. You pick up the phone, you dial, and you're calling another facility. If you have a connection between your branch and your main branch, or if you're connected to a consortium leader or a hub where internet comes in, those are all eligible Category 1 services. Category 2, on the other hand, is for equipment and maintenance on the equipment and managed equipment within the same building. So you think of your Wi-Fi, you think of network routers and switches. Those are all what constitute Category 2. And every year the FCC determines what their proposed eligible category of services will be. Eligible list of services, and they post it for a period of time for comment feedback. And once the comment period is over, they will distribute the final list, and that's posted on USAC's website. And here I'm going to open this up so you can see. This is the page on USAC's website that shows you where the eligible services list has been posted historically. Taking a little bit of time, sorry. There we go. So here's the page, and you can see that it has prior years if you're interested in looking through that. But we're going to open up this one for 2018. And this is actually a long document of 14 pages that includes a little bit of their thought process in developing the list, the responses they got during the comment period, and their responses or their feedback. Each commissioner can actually write any kind of comments that they want. But as you scroll down here, it's a 14-page document. If you go towards the last page, you'll see the telecommunications in Category 1. So here we have data transmission services and internet access and the whole list of examples of what constitutes eligible items. We have asynchronous transfer mode. Some of these are older technologies, but for the most part, any kind of connection that you have between sites or to your internet provider or phone service currently is eligible. And to speak to phone service, that is still under eligibility for Category 1, but 2018-19, the funding year that we're going to be filing for very shortly, that is going to be phased out after this next year. But here's a list of the items that are eligible under that category. Centrex lines, POTS lines, local long distance, cellular voice plans, so any portion of a data plan is not eligible. And now we have Category 2, and Category 2 is very specific as to what it will cover. So we have wireless access points, antennas, cabling, connectors, caching, and caching is can often be a server, and if the server is being used for any other purpose, then you have to identify what is specific to the caching portion and allocate out everything else. Firewall services, switches, routers, racks, uninterruptible power supply, UPS or battery backup, wireless controllers, and software that supports those items. And I just want to make sure that you know any of this equipment, it has to be supporting, so for example, the UPS, the racks, software, anything that is supporting both eligible and ineligible devices, you have to do a cost allocation to account for just the eligible portion. And you want to make sure that you do that, because if you seek funding for something and in the review process they identify that you haven't allocated out cost, if you haven't allocated out, if they determine 30% of your funding request is ineligible, they may deny funding for it. So just be real careful about allocating out ineligible. Also for Category 2, we have the managed internal broadband services. And that isn't very common, but vendors who provide that kind of service are basically giving you or monitoring your devices, configuring your devices remotely. So that can be either through leasing the equipment as part of the plan. It's typically a monthly recurring charge, but again, it's going to be limited to Category 2 budgets, which we will get into later. And then the third section is basic maintenance of eligible broadband internal connection, and an emphasis on basic. So you can't have an unbundled warranty that covers, unbundled warranties are ineligible as it is, period. But if you have a maintenance plan that has same-day service for replacement, those are things that you have to be very cautious about. Basic maintenance is primarily for break-fix scenarios within reasonable time. So we'll get out of this here and go back to the presentation. All righty. So you're probably wondering how much you would qualify for. Funding is in the form of discounts, and it comes off of eligible goods and services, and it's based on three different things: the poverty level or the participation in the National School Lunch Program, or NSLP, of the school district where either your independent library is located or if you have a system where your main branch is located. And that is information that you can find even if you don't have access to an E-rate portal right now. You can kind of get an idea either by asking the school, calling USAC, or there are other sources, and I didn't include them on my list, but if you're interested in finding others, I can certainly help guide you there. Another factor that goes into your discount is your rural versus your urban status. So libraries are designated as rural based on the 2010 census. All entities are going to be determined based on their 2010 U.S. Census. But for library systems, your rural or urban status is going to be application-wide, and if you have a majority of rural branches, then your status would be considered rural. And on the contrary, if they are majority, if it's 50% or more urban, then you're considered urban. So not quite majority. The type of service also plays into here. Category 1, with the exception of voice, you can get from 20 to 90% discount. Voice services you can get from, well, you can only get 10%, and that's only if your school district qualifies for a 90% discount in 2018. So that's something to consider when you're thinking about applying for voice. The most you'll be able to get for eligible services, and not everything is eligible in the voice category, is going to be 10%. Category 2, you can get from 20 to 85%, and again, that percentage is going to be based on the free and reduced lunch count of your school district. So here I've provided a link to rural versus urban status of your branches, which you can do a lookup. I'll click on it and I'll show you, but in order to participate, you actually have to have an entity number in the E-rate portal. So I'm going to show you what it looks like, but I'm going to take you further down through this presentation. I'm going to show you how it actually, how you need to file to get an entity if you do not have one now. So here is, hopefully you can all see that. I'm afraid to press. So I'm going to do, and there you go, Sam, you can see that your library is part of here. So it says here, the status, if you cannot tell, it says R, so it's rural. And that will tell you if you need help. This is a tool that you can go to find it. Alrighty. This is a discount matrix that kind of shows you how all of those factors come into play. This is applicable to independent libraries and library systems only. For consortium applicants, they will take the simple average of each individual entity that's participating. So if it's an independent library, it takes that discount, and if it's a system, the aggregate discount of the system, and then those will all be averaged and you'll get a simple discount. So it won't necessarily fall within this exact matrix here. So you can see here you have the percentage of students eligible for National School Lunch Program. Then you have the Category 1 discounts, and you have somewhat of a differential between urban and rural. As you go down, you can see that starts to the differentiation is no longer the case. So again, same with Category 2. You see a little bit of differentiation in the early percentages, but as you get higher up, it's the same for both rural and urban. And here is the discount matrix for voice services. As I mentioned earlier, it's only eligible for schools that have the highest poverty levels, or the libraries that are with districts that have the highest poverty levels, and it's only going to be 10% this coming year. So now we'll talk about Category 2 budgets, and basically Category 2, you have an allowance to spend over the course of 5 years, and it's going to be dependent on your square footage. Now the square footage multiplier, or the allowance multiplier for libraries with IMLS locale codes of 11, 12, or 21 is going to be $5.12 per square foot. Everybody else, it's going to be $2.35 per square foot. Now, the FCC set a minimum for libraries and schools of $9,412.80. So if your library calculation, your square footage multiplied by your multiplier comes out to less than that, you will still qualify for that much. And it spans 5 years, so you can spend it all at once in 1 year. You can spend it in, a little bit here and a little bit there. But one thing that you have to keep in mind is that budgets are library specific, building specific. So each library that has a budget, if it spends its entire budget, but other libraries within your system have budget left over, it cannot be shared and contributed towards the library that's expended its budget. So budgets are pre-discount. So when you see that figure, that's before you've applied the discounts. That's the actual cost of the eligible goods and services. So you're responsible for paying for 100% of anything over that, plus 100% of any of the ineligible portion of your project. And then non-instructional facilities, if you have them, they don't have their own Category 2 budget. Rather, they have to draw from the budgets of the entities that they're serving, and they can only have Category 2 equipment and services installed if they are for the benefit of the libraries that they serve. So if it's essential for transporting information across the library system, for example, if you have a data center, that is eligible, but it has to draw from the budgets of the libraries that it serves. And if that entity benefits from the service itself, it has to allocate out whatever portion of that service applies to the NIF, the non-instructional facility. So I thought I would give you a couple of examples here. In the first one, we have an independent library with 12,000 square feet and an IMLS code of 32. A local school district, its local school district is eligible for the NSLP at 55%. It has 55% participation, and it has it's in a rural zone according to the U.S. 2010 census. So I'm going to pull out another little document here. Kind of squeeze this in here to show you. Whoops. Okay. So again, here we have the 55% national school lunch program eligibility. So we look here to find which section to look for, and we see here 55%. So we're going to look across here, and we're looking to Category 2. We know it's a rural location, so we scroll down and see it's 80%. And we know that the multiplier is $2.35 because the locale code is not 11, 12, or 21. So here we have the calculation. We have $28,200 is the pre-discount Category 2 budget. Multiply it by the 80% that we discovered. And this is how much the library would have to spend over the course of 5 years, $22,560. Or I'm sorry, that's how much it would qualify for in reimbursements. So the next example is going to be a system. And in this example, we have a library branch that has, a library system with 3 branches. 2 branches are rural, 1 branch is urban, so that makes them a rural system. So when they file, they get to choose from the rural category. Their local school district has an eligibility percentage of 45 on the NSLP. And let's scroll this one over here. Take a look at this real quickly. So here we find 45%. And go over to Category 2 and go to the rural section, and we see that they would qualify for a 70% discount. So in the first instance, branch number 1, IMLS locale code is 12, so it qualifies for the higher discount, the higher multiplier, and it happens to have 50,000 square feet. So Their budget would be $256,000. Number 2 has an IMLS code of 33, so they don't qualify for the higher multiplier, and they have 2,000 square feet. When you multiply $2.35 by 2,000, you come up with 4,700, which is below the lowest minimum budget that an entity can have. So they would actually get a benefit from that, and they would qualify for the $9,412.80 minimum. 70% discount on theirs, and they have a net of $65.8896 that they would qualify for in reimbursements. Then the third branch is also an IMLS Locale 33. It qualifies for a $2.35 multiplier, and it has 10,000 square feet, so it gets $3,500. So the whole system would qualify for $288,912.80 in this case, with a net of $202,238.96 that again they can spend over the course of 5 years. One thing that I want to mention about Category 2 budgets is this was first rolled out, this formula was first rolled out in the funding year 2015-16. So 2018-19, we're actually going into the 4th year of the program. The FCC just sent out a request for comments on how this is working, and they have gotten an overall response very positive to, encouraging them to keep Category 2 as an option for the E-rate program. But they have, I think, seen a lot of requests trying to encourage them to fund at the entity, the higher entity level. So fund, instead of giving individual branches their own budget, provide the entire budget to the system so that they can distribute it according to their needs. And if you are new to E-rate, you will find that that mechanism would be loads easier to file because the process is much more complicated as a result of the individual library building budgets. So I'm hoping that will change. This program, that when they first rolled it out, the FCC designated a 5-year pilot term, and if they don't make any decisions before that pilot program is up, it will revert to an old process in which applicants could file every 2 and 5 years. But this has been very popular. I think they just need to tweak it. So I anticipate this budget process will remain, but you might see it changing so that it's at the district level if you are a system as opposed to the individual library branches. So now we're going to go into the E-rate portal basics. This screenshot is a picture of what you see when you first log into the system, and have, and we'll cover that as well. But I wanted to point out some of the key points of what this system does. This was new. It was rolled out in 2016, and it stores basically everything except for one of the forms, and we'll go over that as well later. But you will see your entity information here. So if you're a system, you're going to see your main system entity plus all of your individual branches. You will see all the forms that you have filed and with links to them. You will see notifications, important notifications. You will see tasks that you have, and customer service cases. So if you have troubles or issues, you'll see those here, and this is where they can be filed. This is also a repository for contracts and all of your applications, filing information about your connectivity, all sorts of information, and it's evolving. They've had some problems rolling it out, but they're working through bugs, and hopefully it will be smooth sailing as we move forward. But just so you know, this is where all of the information is stored. So you need to get an E-rate portal account, and we'll go over that shortly. So, and that's where I am now. So before you begin, every building must have a USAC assigned entity number. If you are new to the program and you're not sure if your library or your library system has ever participated, you can contact USAC and they can help find it for you if it has, or create a new one if it hasn't. In addition to that, even if you are using a consultant, or if you have a consortium that's filing entirely on your behalf and you're not filing your own application, you still need to have someone within your organization, an employee of your organization, establish a user account to act as the account administrator for your organization. And we're going to go through that in just a bit. So if for those of you who already have an account, this is kind of a flow chart, and I hope that this will go smoothly, and I apologize if it doesn't, but I wanted to make sure I brought this up because there are some important deadlines coming up, and I want to make sure that you are prepared whether or not you have an established account, that you are prepared to follow through and check through your portal to make sure all of the information is correct, and I'll explain why in just a bit. So the first step, do you have an EPC user account? And the EPC is the E-Rate Productivity Center, or EPIC. You'll hear it referred to as EPIC. If you do, then log in and verify that your organization is set up properly, and you want to look through, make sure that your entity type is correct. So if you're a library, standalone library, you don't want to be associated with a system. If you're a library system, you want to make sure that you have all of your library, child library entities in your portal, because without that, then everything is going to flow through incorrectly when you start filing the forms. You want to make sure that your square footage is correct, and if not, you can go in and modify it. Your rural-urban status, those are all things that you want to go into the portal and check to make sure, because we have a limited time before the next filing season starts, before that you'll be able to make any changes to that. So do attend to that as soon as you can. If you do not have a user account, then you'll go to step number 2 to determine what you need to do. So my step number 2 starts with, do you know your organization's billed entity number? If you do, you want to call USAC, and that would be this number here, 888-203-8100. And I think you can press 0 immediately without waiting for all the prompts, because you get a lot of them. And then you'll be on hold until a representative can answer your questions. But you want to make sure that you have, when you call them, make sure you have the organization name, the billed entity number, your name, your title, email address, and phone number. And then when you do talk with a representative, you want to write their name down and get a case number, because you're going to be following up with an email to them shortly. If you don't know your organization's entity number, then call USAC and ask them to create one for you, or look for it if you don't know it and you can't find it. So from there, if you don't know, you'll be going to step 3 to determine what you need to provide to USAC. So step 3, does USAC have to create a new billed entity number for you? If the answer is yes, then this list here is all the information that you're going to need to provide them so they can create the entity or entities, as it may be, for you to have correctly set up your portal. So you need the organization, whether it's an independent library or system name, the physical address and mailing address if it's different, phone number and fax. Fax is optional. Subtype, and that means whether you're a private or public library. And if you're filing as a library system, you'll need to provide all of this information for all of the branches and the entity itself. So when you have a library system, the system gets a number, and then the child branches also have their own numbers. And you need to identify which one is the branch, main branch, and if you have it, the school district and the school district entity number associated with the main branch. But if you don't have that information, they can probably help you look it up at that time. And then you want to provide the square footage of each branch. And there are resources for that. I did not include them on there, but if you're not sure and you don't have any documentation to support it, you can either ask USAC for resources, or you can call or email me and I can get that for you. In addition to all of that other information, you need the FCC registration number. So in order to file in this system, you need to have an FCC registration number. And this link here will take you to the site where you can search for yours, or you can file one if you don't have one. And it's a very simple process. All you need is your federal ID number to file it. And if you have questions about what to put down on your FCC registration number, you can call USAC again, or feel free to call me and I can guide you through it. So you'll also need to provide, I did say, your name, title, email address, and phone number, because they're going to be setting you up as an associated applicant filer with this particular entity. And then you write down the case number and name of USAC rep. So here we have, no, you don't have, USAC does not have to create one for you. Then go to step 4, and also if they do, after you've given them all this information, you'll go to step 4. And step 4, they have given you an account administrator account. What is going to happen is you're going to draft a letter on your organization's letterhead with the following information. You need to provide your name and title, mailing address and phone number, your email address, and that will become your user ID, the case number from your call, and then you send in somewhere, or write somewhere in the body that you are requesting that you be added as an account administrator. And then you'll scan and email that to S as in Sam, L as in Larry, D dog, P perfect, R rural, at G ghost, D dog, I indigo, T track.com. And you want to include your case number and the rep if you get their name. That's very helpful in expediting that request. But once you've sent that in, you should get an email back from USAC. And I believe, it's been a while since I've had my clients do this, but I believe you get an email that has EPC account creation in the subject line. So watch for that within the next 2 or 3 days. If you don't get it, keep all the information associated with your case number, and you can call and see what might have happened. You can call USAC at the 888-203-8100 telephone number and follow up to see if they have created it for you. Once you have gotten that email, you have to follow a link and accept terms and conditions, and then you'll call USAC to tell them that you've accepted the terms and conditions, and they will be able to activate your account as the administrator, at which point you can log in to verify your information is correct. So, all right, so the E-rate portal, this is what it looks like when you first get to it. You have, this is the terms and conditions you get at first, and that's what you have to agree to. And then I think you have another set of terms and conditions that you have to accept when you sign in. And that's a little bit more lengthy. And I think that, yeah, the first time you sign in, that you'll get that, but after that you don't have to accept the terms and conditions other than this one. Okay, so what I wanted to do now is pull up a training portal to kind of show you some key areas for you to be watching for when you are participating. And let me make sure I've got the right one here. I don't know how clearly this is coming through. If you cannot see this, Cheryl, maybe you can let me know if there is anything that doesn't seem to be clear enough for the participants to see. But I wanted to kind of navigate through this.
Looks okay so far, Lori.
Okay, good. I wanted to navigate it through it just to show you some really key areas on this. Let me pull up here. Okay. I lost it, didn't I? Here we go. Okay, so this is your landing page. When you first log into the portal, if you don't find your landing page, you can get back to it by either clicking one of these menu items at the top, or clicking the menu items at the top and then clicking this little logo, and it will take you back there. Or if you click Reports, you'll see the link to my landing page as well. So the first order of business is to make sure that everything is correct. And when I had talked earlier about making sure that your organization is up to snuff and everything is in order, this is where you would do it. So you first go down to Library Systems. In this case, you go to My Entities, and the first entity listed under here will be the primary entity. So if you're an individual independent library, you're only going to see one entity there. If you're a library system, you'll see the main entity listed first, and then you'll see the library branches underneath it. So you want to click on the main entity, and here's where you can manage the information. Oh, I apologize. I'm going to go back to the manage the organizations. Okay. You have to go to the Manage Organizations. Click on that at the top. And hope that it populates. Then you'll have the organizations that you can manage, and you click the checkbox beside it, and then select Manage Organization. And here's where you'll see the information that you can modify. So if you need to change your address, make sure you do that. Make sure you look at the, I think if you see organization type here, you might see that it's a library system versus, oh, I'm sorry, that's down here. Yeah, this portal is for service providers, consultants, and applicants. So that's what that is referring to. In this case, this is an applicant. You want to make sure that your mailing address is correct. If you want to have other methods of contact, it looks like they have some things asterisked, which means that those are required pieces of information. Make sure that your subtype is correct, if you're private or public, and your FCC registration number is correct. You don't have to provide your email address or your website URL if you don't want to. And let's get back to the main page. Now this portal is also where you are going to, you will manage users. So if you are the account administrator, you are the only one who can do this. You are the only one who can add or remove users and give them permissions. Consultants can actually, or add a consultant relationship. If you are a consortium member, either the consortium organization itself or you can make that association. But for most of the users that you need to set up in your portal, that will be done by the account administrator only, and this is where you would do it. So here you can go to Manage Users, again, that link at the top. And you click on the organization, and then you can either manage user permissions, add or remove existing users, or create a new user. Let's start here with manage user permissions. And you can see here that this person is just a test email. This is not just this isn't a real person, but basically this is where you're going to see all the users that you've added. And here's where you need to go to give permissions on a form-by-form basis. So you can give them full rights, which gives them the ability to create, modify, and certify forms. You can give them partial, which allows them to submit forms, but they can't certify them. And you can also give them just view only, so they can get in there and see the forms. Now, all of the columns are the same with the exception of the 498 form. I'm going to discuss what the 498 form is shortly, but the only options there are either a school or library official, general financial contact, or no access. And we'll go over what those permissions mean later when I discuss the form. But you will only see each user that you've already added here. So once you've added users, you can come back here and modify the permissions at any time. And then we'll go back to creating a new user. This would be only for users that are part of your organization. If you are wanting to add a consultant user, so if you are going to have a consultant file for you, you need to first add them as a consulting firm, and I'll go over that shortly. And then you have to add or remove existing users because they are already in the system. But this create a new user is only for individuals within your organization that you can give permissions to. So you would go through the steps of adding the user, and then you come back to the manage user permissions to grant them whatever permissions are appropriate based on their that user. So to add a consultant or to associate yourself with a consortium, that is done by clicking on the main entity, and then you look up here. You can see also this is another place where you can add the users and give them permissions. But here, if you click this drop-down box, you can see there's a number of different options here. Modify the account administrator. You can create and manage a general contact. And the account administrator and the general contacts, they generally get most of the emailed notifications that come as a result of the filings that you do. If you have a consultant, that person will as well. I'm not sure exactly how the permission, what the permission levels that you've assigned to each individual user in your system, how that impacts what notifications they get. It seems to be an evolving process right now. And I know that for my sake as a consultant, and I have employees, some of us have partial rights and others have full rights, and we're not getting the same notifications. So if you want somebody to have all of the notifications, then you might want to consider giving them full rights permissions. So anyway, I wanted to take you here to show you how to manage organizational relationships. So that's where you'll go if you want to add a consultant or be associated with a consortium. And there you go here, you click add a consulting firm. They'll have to give you their consultant ID number. Every consultant has to have one if you're working with one. You can do a name search, I think, as well. And you go through search, and then you select them and add them. And then once they've been added, their firm has been added, you'll have to go back to add or remove existing users. And that's where the consultant, the individual consultant from that firm, can be added to help you with your E-rate filings. Okay, let's see what else do I want to cover on this. I think that's pretty much what I wanted the most of the information that I wanted to cover, kind of a general overview of what this looks like and feels like. Let me go back to the main page once more. When it comes time to filing, no, I'll go over these two. So each of these tabs, News tab, this is something that is going to include news feeds from both your specific applications and those that are filed for everybody. So you have to kind of become familiar with this and learn how to weed through anything that is relevant to you. Although for the most part, notifications that are important come through email in addition to being available here. So there are some exceptions to that, and I just, so if you kind of keep tabs on it periodically, you can do search by keywords and hopefully be able to pull out anything that's associated with your filings. The tasks is really when you've started a form. If it hasn't been submitted, then you'll see it in here, and it will allow you to just link right back into it. Once a form has been submitted but it's waiting to be certified, again it will be here, and it will allow you to link back into it to complete the certification process. Here you will see records, and that includes all sorts of interesting information. You can see some of these records that you can pull up are limited to your account specifically, while others you can pull up anybody. So here you can pull up applicant entities, and you'll see everybody. This is the training portal, so it's limited to only a few, but you'll actually be able to pull up everybody. And then they have some search filters if you're looking for a particular record. One thing that I would advise you to do as you move on through the process, if you're doing your own filing, I have found that it's difficult to find specific information based on how they've established their filters. If you name your forms, those are the words that they use to look for in the filters. Use the name of your form, the first word in your form should be something that is relevant to you. So if you're filing as an individual library, you might want to reference the service that you're filing something specific for, and the funding year that it's associated with, just so that they can be found when you do keyword searches in the future. Reports. I haven't used this much other than to get myself back to my landing page. You will see submitted modifications. So when you go into your profile and you see that you need to change the address or the square footage or change from rural to urban, you'll actually see that here. That's the only place that those will show up. And then actions. You can file a case with USAC from this site. Create a whistleblower case if you want to report a violation. This is something new here. They created some special conditions for applicants who are in the hurricane area from Houston area. You can search information filed on 471s from anybody, and search 470 information that has been posted by anybody. So I think that will cover most of the information that we have for now. I will come back to this in a little bit, but for now we'll go on. Okay. So now we're at the filing process itself. There are 4 major forms and then some other associated forms that may or may not need to be filed. And I'll cover those a little bit more in depth, but just for the sake of an explanation, the Form 470 is the first form that you file to initiate the bidding process. The Form 471, it identifies, it's after the 470 has been posted for 28 days, you've identified your vendors, you've signed contracts if applicable, and you file for how much you think that service or equipment will be. The 486 comes after you've been approved, and you identify the start date of the service and you confirm your compliance with CIPA, Children's Internet Protection Act. And then the Form 472 or 474 is the form in which you invoice USAC for your discounted portion. If you file a 472, it's when the applicant pays for the services in full and then files for reimbursement directly from the vendor, or from USAC. And if you file, if the 474 is the method of reimbursement, then the service provider files it, and they provide discounts on their bills. We'll go over a little bit about the 470. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me first cover the other program forms. The Form 498 is required if you want to go with the bare Form 472 method of reimbursement, because this form provides your banking information where deposits should be submitted, and you will have to do that fairly soon if you are filing for reimbursements for Category 2 for 2016, because the deadline to file is coming up. So make sure that you have that in order. That's something that is filed once. If you have changes to your bank, you'll need to update it, but make sure that you get that form filed. A Form 500 is filed after a commitment has been made and you need to make changes such as a contract expiration date, or a service start date change, a SPIN change, a service provider identification number. So if you mistakenly filed under the wrong SPIN associated with your vendor, then you can file a Form 500. I'm sorry, SPIN change is a separate form in itself, and you file a SPIN change request form. Now, and the service substitution is yet another form. If you have a piece of equipment that you purchased, and by the time you order the equipment, it's obsolete, and you need to get a substitution for it, you would file a request here for a service substitution. These are all forms that are filed in the E-rate portal in EPIC. So now drilling a little bit more into the actual forms themselves, the main forms. The 470 is the form that initiates the bidding process, and it's filed through the EPIC portal. You enter the information about the services that you want vendors to bid on. So you're going to indicate what Category 1 and Category 2 items you want. And once it's posted, vendors will be able to see it in their portal and contact you if they have questions, or just submit bids based on the information that you've provided. Now, when you file a 470, you can include an RFP with it. Any 470 and its associated RFP must be posted on the USAC website for at least 28 days before you can select vendors and sign contracts and file the next form in the process. So I guess I already covered those nitty-gritty details. One thing that I didn't mention is that the Category 1 and 2 items can be listed on a single 471. So when you file the Form 470, you go through a competitive bidding process. And a best practice is, before you file your 470, to establish an evaluation matrix which identifies the criteria that you're going to be basing your decisions on and the associated weight of each of those factors. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind is you must choose the most cost-effective option for each service that you're getting funded. And what that means is, after taking into account all of the variables, the one that has the highest points wins. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the lowest price, but pricing has to absolutely be the most heavily weighted factor in your decision. So make sure that it has more points than any other single factor. The aggregate of all other points can exceed pricing, but it has to be, that factor cannot be equal or less than any other factor. There was something else I wanted to mention too. Oh, and it's eligible goods and services only. So if you wanted to consider the cost of ineligible goods, that can be a secondary factor in your consideration. So the bidding process has to be fair and open, and what that means is that if you're sharing information with one vendor, that you should make it available to all potential vendors. And it also means that vendors should not have anything to do with the pre-470 posting or the RFP, drafting the RFP. That's an absolute no-no. You want to make sure that that is not done. If you need guidance, then you should find somebody who does not have a stake in being able to apply for or to bid on your services. So after 28 days, your 471, you can file a 471. The 471 is the form you file to identify the details about the goods and services you wish to have funded by E-rate. It's filed again like the 470 through the EPC system. And with the 471, you can upload any associated contracts with it. 471s are subject to a filing window. So if you've heard of a filing window, that refers to the 471, and the filing deadline for a 470 is based on the filing window, the last date of service for the last date of filing for the 471, counting backwards 28 days. But I can assure you that you do not want to wait until the last minute. You want to get your forms filed as soon as you possibly can. In fact, we can file forms 470 now, even though the 471 for 2018 has not yet opened. So if you want to get in there and start working on your 470s right now, you can do that. They won't open the window for 2018. They're expecting to open the window in January, early January, and anticipate that it will close in late March, but that has not been officially announced yet. So take that with a grain of salt. So, yeah, the 471, you identify the details of your funding requests. That will include the details of your contract, the recipients of the services, the service provider identification number information, and your contracts that you can upload along with it. Category 1 and 2 applications have to be filed separately. So you have to file one 471 for Category 1, C1, and one for C2, or multiple. You can file multiple 471s if you so choose. It's not necessary, but you can. And when they give you the filing deadline, the last moment that you can file is 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the deadline of the window filing period. So I wanted to interrupt this with a special alert, because the admin window is what is something that you need to attend to as soon as possible. The period of time after USAC unlocks their profiles after reviewing applications, after applications were submitted from the prior year, in this case we're talking about 2017, there's a period of time where you can go in and manage your profiles. That's what I just walked you through just a bit ago. You want to make sure that everything is updated, that you have all of your contacts established, all of your users, have your consultants associated properly. If you're going to be joining a consortium, you want to make sure that you're affiliated with them properly before the admin window closes. The admin window will close the day before the 471 window opens. So make sure you get an, if you don't have a user account yet, or if you don't have an entity number, get on that as soon as you can so that you can make sure that you're in line to file for the E-rate funding year 2018. So one thing I do want to mention is that when USAC, there was somewhat of a design flaw in this EPIC portal, and it made it so that USAC's review side has basically a whole different back-end data, and they had to review the forms, and then they had to come back in and load all of the results of their reviews from 2017 applications. So what that did was, if anybody made changes to their profiles between the time that the window closed in 2017 and I think it was early December when they just did that, your profiles may have been overwritten. So if you think you've made changes between May 11th and December 1st, go back in and check just to make sure that those are still actually the case, because the changes that USAC made might have overwritten those. And if you have any dispute with the information that they have overridden, make sure you file a case with USAC's help desk to make sure that they get that resolved for you before the window closes. So, heading back to the Form 471. So after the Form 71s have been filed, they'll go through a review process, and it's called Program Integrity Assurance, PIA. You will get contacted sometimes, but not always. It's not unusual to be contacted, and they might ask for clarification or additional documentation that might not have been submitted along with your application to verify the funding requests that you submitted. And then once you've gone through that process, you'll basically sit and wait until you've been approved. Once you have been approved, you'll receive a notification letter, again, through the EPIC portal, and then you will be ready to take the next step. Typically or historically, the funding has come in waves, and they might start as early as, well, they might even start as early as April this year, but they will continue weekly until all applications have been reviewed. So even though you might have filed early, there's no guarantee as to when you'll get your application reviewed. A lot of it depends on the complexity of your application. So they do try to have all applications reviewed and a funding decision, whether it's denial or approval or a portion of that, they do try to have them all completed by September 30th. So we'd be talking September 30th, 2018. They have historically gotten through the majority of them in the last couple of years, but some of those that are a little more complex have been even past the beginning of the year. So just be aware of that. If you haven't received a funding commitment, you can certainly contact USAC and ask for an update, but until you've been contacted by a reviewer, it's hard to say where your application stands, and there's no real direct contact to them other than through that outreach that they might contact you. And that contact is actually done, the interaction and documentation that you're going to be filing is done through the EPIC portal as well. So you've received a funding commitment decision letter, and it's time to notify USAC that your services have begun. And you do that with a Form 486. This form tells them when the start date of your project or service is, as well as your SIPA compliance information. And you can file them, you complete them in EPIC, and you can file one or more. So if you want to, if you are waiting for a Category 2 project and you want to file your Category 1 funding requests in that 486, on one 486, you can certainly do that. You can file Category 1 and 2 on the same 486. It all depends on how you want to initiate the service. So you cannot file for reimbursement until the 486 has been submitted and approved. The deadline to file them is the later of 120 days after a funding commitment decision letter or the funding service start date. So if you have a later funding date, you might get a warning that your deadline has passed, because it might be past the 120 days after your funding commitment decision, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's 120 days past the actual service start date. But be careful and watch for that, because if you miss that, you could miss out on your funding. Deadlines are really important in this program. You've got to pay close attention and make sure that you meet them so you don't jeopardize your funding. So the FCC Form 472, which is also called a BEAR, Billed Entity Applicant Reimbursement Form, or the 474, which is a SPI, Service Provider Invoice. That's the form that's filed to invoice USAC for the discounted portion of your goods and services. And it is the only form at this point that is not filed in the EPIC system. And you have to make sure if you're responsible for filing your bear forms, and if you've never filed a bear form for your organization yet, there is a deadline coming up for Category 2 and possibly for Category 1 if you had an extension on your fall deadline. There was a deadline in October, but if you got an automatic extension for that, you'll need to make sure that you have a 498 established with and a PIN to get into the bear system. The deadline to file them is typically the October 28th for Category 1 and recurring Category 2 services each year. The deadline to file, I put deadline to file Category 2, but that only applies for the non-recurring portion of Category 2, 472s and 474s, is typically January 28th following the end of the funding year. And that's calculated by counting 120 days after the last date to receive service. So something I didn't mention was Category 2, because it's often easier, more convenient to implement services in the summertime, at least for schools, they have given applicants an opportunity after the end of the funding year, which is June 30th, to implement a Category 2 project through 9/30, September 30th. So the deadline to file the subsequent bear forms, or the 472s or the 474s, is 120 days after the June 30th, which would be Category 1 and recurring services for Category 2, or September, let me back up. The deadline to file the forms is 120 days after June 30th, which is 10/28. The deadline to file Category 2 non-recurring bear forms, or 474s, is 120 days after September 30th, or January 28th. I hope I didn't confuse you there. I apologize if I did. So once you have filed, you can negotiate with your vendor about which method you want to file for the reimbursements. Once a method has been established, that cannot be changed. So, and not all vendors will offer the bear form as an option, but for those who do, you want to make sure that you are in communication with them to decide which would be your preference. There are different pros and cons for either way. You have to decide which makes more sense for you. Typically when it's when the vendor offers discounts, they will initiate the discounting process for non-recurring charges immediately after you have filed your 486. Some vendors require that you follow up and fill out specific paperwork to help guide them and identify what services may or may not have been allocated out or whatnot. So make sure that you're in close contact with your vendors when that might apply as well. You can file multiple 472s or 474s throughout the year. There's no specific time frame that you can file them other than the actual final deadline. So if you want to file them quarterly, you can. You can file them monthly. The key is you have to have, the service has to have been provided, and the service has to have been paid for before you can file a bear form. For the 474 form, a vendor has to have actually provided the service and discounted for the amount that they are seeking reimbursement for. When you do file a bear form, you will file it in, you will get reimbursed directly to your bank account, and that's a process by which the 498 that I mentioned earlier will initiate. So want to make sure you get your 498 filed. Let me see if I have here. I'm going to go ahead and jump to this here, and then I'll go back to that last slide. But I want to show you where to look for the 498 in your portal if you haven't already done that. Here we go. Nope, that's not it. Sorry. Okay. Now, kind of a not very intuitive place to look for your 498, where to file it. So I'm going to show you. From your landing page, you want to click in your main entity, and then you see related actions. You want to click on that. That's on the top menu here. And then you should scroll down here. You'll see a whole bunch of things that you can do here. You'll see Create FCC Form 498. If you do not see that, that means that you have not granted yourself the correct user permissions, and you'll have to go back through the portal and first give yourself financial contact status, and then you can file your 498. Now, the 498, in addition to banking information, you'll be providing your FCC registration number and your Dun & Bradstreet number. If you don't have that information, I do have a link for both of those in the resources page at the end. But those are key elements that are going to have to match. Everything that's in your portal will have to align with the information you provide on your 498, as well as your FCC registration number. And if it doesn't, then that might delay your approval of the 498. You can work through that, and they usually communicate with you by email if that's the case. But just so you know, once this is submitted, you'll have to follow up with an upload of documents like a canceled check or a statement to verify the bank information. So watch for an email or any kind of, this process has changed, so I don't know if it prompts you directly after you've filed it to upload it into a portal. But if you do not get anything from anybody within a week, then I would follow up with USAC at the help desk and ask them for some guidance to make sure that you didn't overlook anything, or that maybe an email got caught in your junk mail or something like that. So let me go back to the last slide here. Okay, so I covered this. The 472 method requires a certified and approved 498, so get on that right away if you have any upcoming BEAR forms to file. The 472 method requires a PIN to access the BEAR portal. And if you have EPC or EPIC access, you can request a PIN by filing an EPIC case and asking them for it. Or I think you can call them and ask for it as well. And what you need to provide to them is your name and title, your email address, your employer name, the main address where you want PINs to be sent to you by mail, and your billed entity number. So what I would say, what I want to stress is that both of these two processes, the 498 and the PIN filing, can take a couple weeks or more. So if you have any deadlines coming up for getting BEAR reimbursements, make sure you get these taken care of right away. So this is SIPA compliance, and this is compliments of Sonia Schreier-Norris, again, from Library of Michigan. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, SIPA is Children's Internet Protection Act, and in order to receive Category 1 funding for Internet access and anything that is Category 2, or if it's a telecommunications service that's for the purpose of connecting to an Internet access, then you need to be compliant with SIPA. And I know that that's something that libraries struggle with because it requires that you provide filtering. We'll go through all of the things that you need to provide with these slides as well. So you do have time. If you're a first-time filer, you do have time to become SIPA compliant. You have to be taking steps towards compliance in the first year that you've applied for either of those services that require SIPA compliance. And by the second year, you should be able to certify that you are compliant. However, even that, if you have procurement, certain procurement rules that require you to delay it for whatever reason, you may be able to make a case for up to 2 years. So here are the rules. You have to create an internet safety policy, and it has to address all of these items. Access by minors, and minors are 17 and younger. I apologize, that's for schools. For libraries, you can define it in your local community. To inappropriate matter on the internet. The safety and security of minors when using email, chat rooms, and other forms of direct electronic communications. It must also address unauthorized access, including hacking and other unlawful activities by minors online. It must address unauthorized disclosure, use, and dissemination of personal information regarding minors, and measures designed to restrict minors' access to materials harmful to them. You have to install a technology protection measure, a filter, and once you have installed it, you should be able to prove that you have that filter in place. You can take perhaps screenshots, retain a copy of the purchase, show that it is actively in use so that if you were ever audited, you would be able to demonstrate that you do indeed have a filter in place. Now, the filter does have to be in place on all of your computers. However, you can have, if an adult approaches you and wants to have the filter turned off, you are allowed to ask that. You are, at your discretion, can turn that off. And you must have a public notice and a meeting to discuss your internet safety policy. And it has to be available, posted within a reasonable amount of time, and available for public comment. And as this slide says, public here refers to your constituency, whether that's students and parents for schools or library patrons for libraries. And for efficiency, you can combine this meeting with another, such as an open school board meeting or library board meeting. So this one here is for schools only. They have to educate, they have to provide an education for abuse and understanding how internet should properly be used. So required documentation, a copy of the internet safety policy, documentation that the school or library gave public notice and held a public meeting or hearing on the policy, documentation of the adoption of the policy. For example, if you have approval minutes, go ahead and include those in your information. A description of the filter and a report or other documentation on the use of the filter, and copies of the FCC Form 479 and or Form 486 as applicable. So the 479 I didn't include in my information. That's the form that you would submit to your consortium leader if you were participating as a consortium and getting funding for non-telecommunications services. So internet or anything that's category 2, you would have to certify to them that you are compliant with SIPA, because they in turn affirm that they have received all of these 479s for their members who are participating and getting funded. So here I am. I'm at the resources that are available to you. This again is from Sonia Schreier-Norris, and wanted to let you know, in case you aren't aware, of some of the things that the Library of Michigan does provide to its constituent libraries who are applying for E-rate. They do have a website with lots of information. They maintain a presence with the American Library Association E-rate Support Task Force, which gives them access to other state coordinators and to USAC. And they do, they participate, they have their finger on the pulse. So they're really kept up to date. She mentions here TV white space, and for those of you who might be interested in understanding that, TV white space is basically the ability to transmit signaling from the FCC basically gave out the white space once they went from analog to digital signals and for TV broadcasters, and they allowed other entities to use it. So the TV white space can be used as a Wi-Fi kind of like device with a proper Wi-Fi access or a TV white space access point. It can be broadcast internet that comes into one building to another building. The only way in which that scenario would be eligible would be if the far remote library location is a library and not a non-eligible entity. So it has to be a site, either a non-instructional facility or a library building. So just so you know, it can't be used for devices to check out and take home. It can't be used for a community kiosk. It has to be at an eligible facility. And when I say community kiosk, I mean a non-library kiosk. In addition, the Library of Michigan sits on the E-rate Advisory Committee, which meets monthly and discusses all things E-rate. I'm also a member of that, and there's a lot of information that we share in those meetings. And they respond to PIA requests on your behalf. And the most common things that they are asked to verify are LSTA eligibility and square footage for Category 2 budgets. So if you're seeking funding for Category 2, be sure that you have something that supports the square footage you identify. If you are anticipating in the next funding year to have an expansion of your library, then be sure to keep your drawings, and you can make sure that that anticipated total square footage is entered on your profile now. Even though that may not be the case currently, you want to make sure that you will qualify for the maximum amount that you would be eligible for based on the square footage once your library is, the expansion project is complete. So this brings me to my last page, which is lots of resources, and I kind of figured that I would be sending this to anybody who would want it because there's a lot of them, and I doubt that you can read them and write them down quickly. So I will leave it at that. Now I will open it up to questions. I don't see anybody that has sent questions. Did you get any?
No, so far I have not gotten any questions. Okay. I will say that that resource page with the links we will post along with the archive so that you all will have it when the archive's ready. We maintain, the Mid-Michigan Library League maintains a page of workshops and webinars, well, basically the archived webinars that the ones that we have been offering statewide to anyone associated with the public library that are coordinated on behalf of the Co-op Directors Association. So all of those are on the website that I manage, and we will post this there, Lori's contact information, and the resource links that she provided.
And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to call or email me. I kind of threw a lot of information out at you, and if you're new, it can be overwhelming, so feel free to call or email me. I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Lori, the presentation you did, I found very enlightening, because I've been associated with E-rate for a long time, but this EPC or EPIC sort of changed the way, you know, you concentrated on that, but it's new, it's different from, you know, if you may have applied, you know, 8 years ago or something like that, right?
Most definitely. It's very, very different. So in some ways I think it's wonderful because it does have, it retains the historical information much better than the old system did, and it's you can find a lot of details that were pretty much like these one-off forms, the forms 500 and the service substitution forms. Those are all there. You can see what status is if they're in, you know, if they've been submitted but haven't had a decision made on them. You can see historical information. You can see contracts, so you don't have to go hunt them down. You know, if you're a new person taking over, that's a benefit, definitely. So.
And in previous trainings that I've been associated with, we spent a lot of time on the forms 470 and 471. I mean, there is quite a lot to be said about how you you describe the services that you're looking for in that form 470. And I think that might be the place where people might need additional help if they're not really that tech savvy or know what they're really trying to ask for.
Absolutely. It's really important to provide as much information as you can, and know that if you are providing any documents to vendors who call you afterwards, that could be construed as an RFP. So to avoid any hint of that, you should probably indicate that you are uploading an RFP and do so with your 470, so that and it doesn't have to be a formal RFP. It could just be a list of information that you're providing to all vendors. So just know that that would be considered as an RFP in the eyes of USAC.
Great. And is it possible, since nobody's asking questions, I'm just asking questions, is it possible to say something like, I want the highest speed telecommunications that I can get for my library?
That's a very good question, and I'm glad you asked it. So now what you do when you file for anything with bandwidth associated with it, and that's what most services do have, you are going to have to identify your minimum and your maximum, and now they're indicating that you should also provide increments. So in the actual check boxes when you're selecting the services that you want on the 470 right now, you can select the minimum and you can select the maximum, but there's no place right now to indicate your increments, so that's what you should use the narrative for. The narrative has plenty of room to provide as much as you want. It used to be cut off, I think, at 250 characters, but I'm certain, because I'm pretty verbose on mine, it allows you a lot more than that.
Great. So does anybody who's still on have a question for Lori? If you want, I can unmute everybody. How do I do that? There, I just unmuted everybody. If anybody wants to speak up with a question, now's a good time.
I think I sense a bit of overwhelmed.
Well, either that or you did such a great job, Lori. Honestly, I thought it was a very good overview. You know, hopefully nobody's cutting and running from the room. There's a lot of money to be had here, and I thought it was enlightening when you talked about, well, when you showed, I think it was Sonia's information about the percentage of the amount of money that comes to Michigan from E-rate for libraries is the same as it comes from LSTA. Is that what she said?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. That's a lot of money. And it's not a competitive program, is that correct?
No, not on Category 1. Category 2 used to be, and if they go back to the old formula, I would consider it a competitive program, because you're basically vying for a limited amount of dollars. But ever since they rolled out this new formula and increased the funding cap, everybody who has filed a legitimate application for both Category 1 and 2 has been funded.
And that's nothing to sneeze at. That's a pretty big statement right there. So if you do the work and you do it, you pay attention, you do it properly, you know, by deadlines and proper forms and all that, you will get funded.
Yep.
Great. Lori, I really appreciate you doing this today. I don't see any more questions. I've taken people off mute, but I don't hear any questions. So I think we can let you go and just tell you how much we appreciate you having done this today.
Well, I'm glad to do it, and good luck to everybody. I hope that you all have success in your E-rate filings. And again, if you have questions, contact me. I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Lori.